Hello and welcome to Happy Horror Time. My name is Matt Emmerts.
And I'm Tim Murdoch. Today, we are so lucky to chat with someone who is no stranger to the horror genre. He's a writer, producer, director, and actor. Is there anything he can't do? Most recently, he directed a fantastic horror documentary called Unknown Dimension, the story of Paranormal Activity, which is currently streaming on Paramount+. He also produced one of our all-time favorite horror films of the last decade, House LLC. Please welcome to the podcast, Joe
Bandelli.
Ruined it. It was such
I did ruin it.
Thank you so much. Should we do that again? Because
No.
I almost feel like, oh no, because you almost
Natural.
you almost forgot to introduce you. It was
I
a great intro, and then it was
I
like,
love
and
it.
that's it. You've done all this, and that's it.
If you've ever listened to this podcast, you know I can't pull it together.
Joe, we're very, very grateful to have you on the podcast. Thank you for appearing with us.
Of course, very happy to be here. I love your podcast, and I'm happy that you guys are going to talk some horror with me.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. So, we always like to take it back to the beginning at first rather than jumping right into the movies. And we saw that you grew up in Howell, New Jersey. Which,
Hell yeah,
by the way,
represent Dirty Jers.
okay, so my parents lived in Mahwah, New Jersey for a while,
Okay.
North
Okay.
Bergen County. Where the hell is Howell?
Howell is in Monmouth County. Howell is like sandwiched in between Lakewood and Freehold, and it's about 20-ish minutes away from like Manasquan Beach, Belmar Beach. In essence, it wasn't a beach town, but it was very close to a beach town where I grew up.
Oh,
So,
wow.
You
Okay.
could say it is technically the Jersey Shore, but it's not the trashy Jersey Shore that you watch on the TV show. Not that
The
bad.
situation.
Yeah. I mean, that beach is about 15 minutes south, but that whole show is a bunch of New Yorkers who say they're from New Jersey. It's not really New Jersey. So.
Oh, I love it. I only watched a few episodes of that because it's really hard to stomach them. I guess
There's something about reality shows and things like that make people just want to come back for more of their stupidity.
Of course.
Well, the
More
funny
power
thing
to
is, though, I'm sure I'm sure they've become caricatures of themselves. Like, who knows what they're even really like versus the show. But regardless of that, we wanted to know more about when did your love for horror begin? And growing up, were there any like specific movies or directors that had an impact on you?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a couple little like snippets of things. Like, first off, the first like cartoon that ever really stuck out with me and I remember and I loved it was Walt Disney's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow about the
I
Headless
like
Horseman.
that.
So that was like one of the first cartoons that my mom showed me. We watched it every Halloween and I loved everything about that. Before I moved out to California, I used to go to Sleepy Hollow every year and kind of do all their little like fun Halloween things. This past year, I took my fiance there for the first time. So love Headless Horseman, love that like mythology and that folklore tale type thing. When I was a teenager, I'm going to backtrack a second. When I was a teenager, I read Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. And that book kind of blew open storytelling for me. I was like, oh shit, like this is like a mystery. Like we don't know who killed people. And then you find out that that's like the original mystery, that's what every like Scream is based off of. Clue, like everything is based off of that. And so those are kind of the two things that really stuck with me the most. But for films in general, my mom is a single mother. And when we were growing up, my mom was putting herself through college and she had a boyfriend who she did break up with after I tell you the story. So my mom's not a bad person, but this guy was in the military. He's an army guy. And he kind of had this feeling of like, boys should be raised into men, like strong men, like kind of that old school mentality. So my brother was about 2.5, 3 years older than me. And I just remember little things that he would do to us and make us do because we had to be tough. And I remember him making us watch Nightmare on Elm Street when we were like, I think I was like 4 or 5 and my brother was like 7 or 8. It was terrifying. Like it absolutely scared the shit out of us. Like I think my brother used to have nightmares about it. It was just really, really scary. But something about that movie and something about those things kind of kept tracking in like as I grew up. I think that was the first one. And then coincidentally, Scream in the 90s was the one that really like we had fun with. My brother and I used to dress up as Ghostface and hide in each other's closets. I can think of one Christmas, he put we would record each other Christmas morning and he put it in my room and hid in the closet so that when I woke up, I saw the camera and I went to my closet and jumped out and scared the shit out of me. So
oh my God, I love it.
you could say Wes Craven is probably like the biggest influence in terms of a filmmaker. But yeah, I mean, I love Dumb and Dumber had an impact on me. All these movies, and I kind of had this horror comedy blend that has stuck with me throughout my career. And I try to bring comedy into it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But but yeah, I mean, really my kind of bread and butter into films was slashers. Didn't really go down the supernatural very far, but it was slashers. And then I met a writing and producing partner in New York, and his name's Matthew Wise, and we started a company called Mary Lou's Boys together. Because both of our moms are named Mary Lou. So that's
funny because
Mary Lou Maloney?
Tim just dressed up as Mary Lou from prom night 2 for Halloween. So that was the first thing I thought of. Yeah.
And then zombies became a big thing. I did a zombie series, and I love zombies. And supernatural became one of those things. And same thing with like found footage. I think every time I became exposed to something, I just kind of immersed myself in it. And then, you know, you get a sleeve of horror villains, and then it's kind of like you're a horror
wait,
guy.
can you show, sorry, just for the listeners, Joe has
wow.
Oh my God, his whole right arm is covered
it's Michael
in
Myers.
tattoos. There's Leatherface, Michael Myers. Wait, Freddy. Oh my God. Okay, we're taking
Jason.
we're taking a screenshot of
and
that.
there's Ghostface.
Oh my God.
and Pinhead.
Oh my God.
That's an amazing arm.
Can we be friends in real life, please?
We can.
I can't believe. I guess I'm a little amazed because we on the podcast, we usually we've talked to so many actors and actresses from horror movies, and a lot of them, when you ask them about growing up, like if any horror impacted them, and it's no shade on them, but a lot of them really didn't love horror. They're like, did it for a job.
The Exorcist scared me.
Getting to talk to someone who is truly immersed in it and loves it, which is kind of more of our experience, is very different than like, no, I didn't. Horror really wasn't on my radar, but now I was in a movie.
You know what's really interesting is like horror definitely stuck with me more than any genre, but I'm one of those people that like I grew up on Schwarzenegger and Stallone and Van Damme movies. I grew up on, you know, There's Something About Mary and what's it called, Dumb and Dumber and the Fairley Brothers stuff. I grew up watching Gene Wilder and like Richard Pryor. So like when people talk about like, oh, this genre, I'm like, yes, that's my genre. And then they talk about action, I'm like, kind of did like action too. Like I kind of liked everything. And to fast forward into life, like I didn't even go to college for film. I didn't go to film school. I didn't do any of that stuff, but I was always in like sketch comedy groups. I was always doing like performances. And I went to college. I wanted to work in law enforcement. I wanted to work for the government.
Yeah, so, I was going to ask you, like, you went to the College of New Jersey and earned a degree in criminal justice?
Yeah,
what changed?
Yeah, like at what point were you like, Hollywood, please?
So the two figureheads for me, the two male figureheads in my life really were my grandfather and my brother. And my grandfather was in the military. He always was kind of like the more reserved one in the family. So I kind of was stuck with him in terms of like, I kind of had a lot of the similar traits that he had. And I always had this calling of like, serve your country. And fuck, man, I'm glad I never went down that road.
Hey, wow, that's a lot of pressure for a young person.
But especially with all the shit that's happening in this world with like the whole far left, far right battle of everything. Like, so I'm glad I didn't go down that path. Sorry to make it political, but
no. Well, you know, Matt and I love House LLC. It was the first movie in a long time that I had to have a nightlight on that night, watch, because I was scared.
Well, I think, and also it's the first movie in a long time that after we saw it, like it really, because we watch horror movies all the time, you know, I mean, and so very few stick with us afterwards because we've seen so much, and that one really, really did.
Yeah. Well, how did you get involved in House LLC?
Because you were a producer on the film.
Correct. I'm the only producer.
Oh, you were the producer.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm the producer.
The producer.
Yeah, but listen, I had a, you know, everything about this business and probably every other business is who you know. And I worked after film school. I was working on films. I was writing. I was getting kind of ready, and I was gearing up to direct my first feature, which is, it used to be called Seclusion. Now it's called Cabin Fear. I was gearing up to make that in 2014, and in 2013, I had a friend that I worked with who was like, "Hey, do you know anyone that would produce a horror movie?" And I was like, yeah, dickhead me, like I do that. and he goes, oh, well, I know you're busy. You're prepping your film. You have a full-time job. You're working for this company, live stream and live production. He's like, would you have the time? And I was like, 100%. And that guy actually was Adam Schneider, who plays Mac in Hell House. So he introduced me to Steve, because him and Steve had known each other. Steve and Cognetti had known each other for a while. And when Steve and I met, it's sort of like Steve's a very creative guy, but Steve's not a technical guy. So a lot of stuff, he was like, I want to do this. I don't know how to do this. I want to do this. He had the script mostly done. He already found the location, which is the Waldorf Estate of Fear in Pennsylvania, in Lehighton, Pennsylvania. He already had these things. So he brought me in to like kind of give him script notes, bring the crew together and sort of execute the shoot, which was a 10-day shoot. And
That was only 10 days?
Yeah, 10-day shoot.
That's amazing.
But yeah, so that year was a big year for me because that was the first year that I produced a feature, and that was the first year that I directed a feature.
And you're also in it, right? Like, where are you in it?
Well, yeah, they say, and it's funny because on IMDb it says uncredited, and
so
that can mean so many things. So who are you, and where can we see you in the Hell House?
Well, Steve has a big thing, which I appreciate. I hate when people put their names over things 100 times, like written by, and then another credit for directed by, and then another credit for produced by, and then another credit for acted. So he didn't want to credit anyone who weren't always credited as something else. So, which makes sense. I get it. But it came out of necessity. A lot of the stuff on the first film were, shit, we need someone to do this. Shit, we need someone to do this. And when we were doing the documentarian, Diane, I think it's Diane Graves, the one who was literally shooting everything, the one who was interviewing all the people, he wanted her to have a team, which was an editor, who was Mitchell, who wound up being the main character in the second one, and then Jonathan, who was the camera guy. So I played Jonathan. So you only see me in 2 moments. You see my arm, a less tattooed version of my arm, and you hear my voice in the scene when Sarah leaves to go rest, and then we're arguing over what, should we
know exactly what you're talking about. We've seen the original House. We've seen all of them, but we've seen the original multiple times because I had to show like everyone I knew. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So.
And the thing that everyone always tells me is like, you're the voice of reason. Like, I just remember being him, like, I'm just going to play this like I would be in a fucking environment where a bunch of people died and someone's trying to get me to go to that house. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, go for it. So
it's so good. Like it just,
and I remember now I'm remembering because again, because aren't you trying to get the woman who then goes back to the house at the end, you're trying to get her not to go,
correct?
Right?
Correct.
Okay, then yes, I remember exactly.
I'm the scared cameraman trying to get her to leave.
Yes, of course, sequence. I do remember. Yes.
And again, out of necessity, like we had a great cinematographer on it, Brian Harkins, I think. I might be mispronouncing his last name, but he was great to work with. But the reason why I played that role is because a lot of this stuff with a lot of how things were shot, Steve wanted to have someone who knew how to use a camera to shoot that final sequence because there were so many things and there were a lot of like corners and small alleyways. So it wasn't something where we could have Brian shooting and me standing behind Brian. Mm-hmm. So he wanted me to do it because I knew how to use a camera and I knew how to, like, in essence, I was a filmmaker. So he wanted me to be in that sequence. And that's sort of how I fell into it. And then I'm not sure if you guys noticed, you probably did because you looked at my credits, but the running theme with Steve and I is I play a cameraman in every one of the Hell House movies and I get killed.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's it. But hey, use what you know. And also that's, and I promise we're going to shift to the Paranormal Activity documentary, the majority of
wherever you want.
But we had to talk about this just because we love this movie so much. But I have a few specific questions about different parts of House LLC, but overall, because you did mention how, found footage horror is a subgenre within the horror genre. And, it can't be a coincidence that you've worked on 2, big found footage related series. What do you think attracts you to found footage horror? Or was there something that attracted you to it, or was it something you just fell into?
Yeah, well, so when I saw the Blair Witch Project when it came out, but I didn't love it. Like I think it's so creative, it's genius, but like it kind of made me sick when I saw it in theaters. Like it didn't really work for me. And then Paranormal Activity was the other one that came out that like blew my mind because they did what I think Nightmare on Elm Street did for slashers, was take something that's in the woods or on a random place of someone that you're related to, and they brought it to your home that everyone has to deal with. Mm-hmm. So prior to working on the Hell House series, I'd seen like VHS, maybe like a couple other ones, but I hadn't seen a ton of found footage movies and I never really wanted to work in it. But this is why working with Steve is so great, because Steve tapped into a genre that general audience wise, the only movies that people in the public really know are Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity. Like horror fans know of Grave Encounters, know of VHS, know of Taking of Deborah Logan. We know of all these other films because we're horror fans, but the regular audience doesn't know this stuff. So I think Steve tapped into a genre that was kind of like, it eventually got overpopulated, but it was untapped at the time. And like, if you pull off a good found footage film, you're on lists every year for Halloween, which is what we luckily got on, is like every year we're in a top 10 list of like horror movies. We're in a top 5 list for found footage movies. But like if we did a slasher, which is what I wound up directing that year, the movie was okay. It wasn't very good. I made a lot of mistakes, but you're holding yourself up to like hundreds of movies, and you're just going to fall between the cracks, and like maybe people will see it, maybe people won't. So I think that's what kind of drew me to it. And then once he hired me as the producer on it, I immersed myself in it because I wanted to make sure, you know, my biggest thing with found footage is it's an easier genre to shoot as a newer filmmaker because it's cheap. You don't need to spend time. You don't need to spend time going crazy on lighting scenes, on rehearsing scenes, because it's very forgiving because the actors are walking through it. So it's supposed to look bad.
It's so scary to me because I'm always like, it's real.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but that was the reason why, like, and that was like found footage for me was it's easier to do, it's cheaper to do. But then the more you wind up doing it and the more there are films, I think the hardest thing about found footage is justifying where the camera is. Like, that's always the hardest thing. Like, I can tell you 9 out of 10 found footage movies, there's a part in every one where you're like, why the fuck are you recording right now? Like, why are you doing this? Like, this makes no sense. Like, drop the camera and get the hell out of there. So I think that's the hardest part. But again, there's a lot of other things that make it cheaper and easier for younger filmmakers to get their start in.
No, that's very true. And I have to ask about, so I think one of the most iconic parts of House LLC is the clown. Obviously, that clown is fucking terrifying. Like, it really, really is. And I know I read that even though it's supposed to be a mannequin, obviously I read that actual actors wore the clown mask and the suit. So I've got 2 questions about the clown for you. Number one, did you ever get to wear the clown suit? And number 2, was that a costume that you guys just purchased, or did you create that mask just for this movie?
Sure. I'll answer. Can I answer in reverse order?
Of course.
Okay. Clown costume, Steve bought a specific clown mask that he had made for Hell House. The clown was never supposed to be like the biggest thing in the movie. It was just supposed to be a scare sequence in the movie. It took on a life of its own after that movie, and we were like, we have to put it in every single movie. We bought the clown costume is a generic clown costume that we bought. The mask, we got the mask that Steve ordered, and we all collectively were like, this mask sucks. Like, we can't use this mask. And so
it was a William Shatner mask.
Yeah, it was a William Shatner mask. So, but speaking of that, that's kind of what we did. We had Angie Moyer, who owns the Waldorf, who was our production designer. She was like, why don't I just grab a mask of like one of these things that we use? So she grabbed a mask that she had that she was going to use in her haunt, because she has a haunted house attraction every year there. She grabbed this mask, and then we asked our makeup and special effects designer, Lexanne Rosser, to play with it and kind of make changes to it. So she made changes to it. Steve made changes to it. Angie made changes to it. And we all kind of got to what you see on screen. Which became this terrifying clown mask. But yeah, and then to the who wore it in the first movie, 3 people wore the clown costume. The actors, Danny Bellini, who played Alex, and the actor who played Tony. Why is his name skipping me? But the 2 of them played it for majority of the scenes, especially when they weren't in the scenes and the other one was. And then we had a PA who stepped into it for one scene. And I think that stuff got cut out. So I think in the actual film, it's just the 2 of them. In the second movie, I played the clown. And then in the third movie, we had another production assistant who played the clown for the whole movie, Johnny Missile.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I just had a feeling when you were saying about the multiple hats that you wore on this production, I was like, I wonder if he got to wear the clown outfit in some part. Yeah.
But that's like the thing when you're doing these movies, like when you think of studio movies and how they get made, like the producers are like watching from afar, show up every now and then, give a note and then leave. Like, that's not what it's like when you're making found footage movies. Like, you're immersed in these things. So it's like you're sitting there, something's not working right. It's like, fuck it, I'll just go do it. Like, we don't have time to waste. Like, I'll put the costume on, I'll move my head, I'll turn my arm. Like, and that's the thing. And that's my favorite part about indie filmmaking is you have a lot more people that are willing to get their hands dirty than you do in like the studio system.
I was going to ask you, is there going to be a 4th Hell House?
So Steve and I actually are in the process of developing a prequel series, which is called the Abaddon Tapes. We've talked with Shudder a bunch. We're trying to get them to pick it up because all the films are on Shudder's platform. We haven't really gotten where we wanted to just yet, but that series would actually be a narrative series. It's a 6-part limited series, and there would be found footage elements in each one of those series. But like the budgets for Hell House 1, 2, and 3 were $60,000, $50,000, and $80,000. The series would not be that. The series would be much more production value, much bigger. And the goal with the series is like, we're open to doing a 4th movie, but at this point, we don't really want to continue the story in the future. We want to go back and tell like Andrew Tully's story. We want to tell how this character of the clown became the clown. Like, we have a lot of breadcrumbs that are left throughout the 3 movies that are like, how did this person get to there? Like, what happened to Mitchell? Like things like that we want to answer those questions. And we feel
people
like
love that.
Yeah. And I've got to say, and I know we're spending so much time on this, but isn't it cool that you, like, when you made the first movie, can you imagine if you knew what you knew now? And that like, for instance, like you said, the clown, you had no idea that the clown was become so iconic that now literally you may have a series that has an episode related to the clown. Like, isn't that incredible? Like,
listen, to Steve's credit, Steve is, his favorite movie is The Exorcist. I remember we were standing on set and he told everyone, like, before we started, Exorcist is his favorite movie. Blair Witch was like the movie that changed found footage. And our goal is to do that. And I remember being like, afterwards being like, that's not going to happen. Like, we're not going to do that. And, to his credit, he was the one that was like, this is going to be that, this is going to be that, this is going to be that. But I even remember, like, even when we had the cut of it, I think the cast was phenomenal. And I think the cast is why the movie is so good, because they were close behind camera, in front of camera, and you could see it on screen. But even when I saw the finished product, I was like, this is good, but I didn't think it was going to be what it became. Like, people, like, it kind of took on a life of its own, and people love it. And people, there are things that we did in that film that people are like, this is so genius and so amazing. And we're like, thank you. And there are other things people are like, this is so genius, so amazing. We were like, we got lucky. Like that's what happens when you do films like this, is like some things work out awful and some things work out amazing. And luckily we just had the fortune of having a lot of really good things go the right way, plus having a good crew, a great cast, and a good leader on the team. So I think it all worked out really well.
No, that's awesome. And again, for listeners, if you haven't seen House LLC or the 2 sequels,
get on it.
And it's definitely worth it. They're all on Shudder. You said they're all on Shudder. I know that
Amazon Prime too.
They're on Prime. Okay, because I thought I was going to say, I think when we watched it on Prime, so please check those out. But shifting gears to the recent documentary, Unknown Dimension, the story of paranormal activity, just love to ask, like, what led you to wanting to make a documentary of this horror series specifically? Is it because you had just loved it so much? Is it because you had just been working on House LLC, or what led to that?
Pretty much there were 4 main people that got this thing off the ground, and then a 5th one that kind of brought the whole thing together. Anthony Massey from Massey Media. He is the one who did the original 25 years Halloween making. That's how you probably know him, right?
Yeah.
And then his name was Jason. He did Still Screaming. He did documentaries on a lot of big horror franchises. And then the other producer was Rachel Bolofsky, she's the founder of the Screamfest film festival. And Rachel's also the person who was the first person to accept Paranormal Activity into her festival when it was getting rejected by everywhere else. So the 2 of them were the lead producers on it. Our co-producer was Nate Reagan, who's worked with Anthony since Scream. And he's kind of one of those huge fans that like they just made the new Scream 5 movie. They called Nate to ask him how to make the Ghostface costume and how to do certain things, because he was involved in a lot of that process back in the day, just from becoming a fan and then getting involved with the Scream franchise. So Nate is kind of this huge horror fan that, like, he can speak from a fan's perspective. It's always good having his perspective. So it was them 3 and me, and then eventually brought on Nick Landa, our editor, who was a phenomenal editor, the easiest editor I've ever worked with in my life. But what happened was Nate has, I think his son's 11 now, but his son was 8 years old, I believe, at the time. Or it could be wrong. It could be the other way. It could be 11 and 14. But his son, Channing, he takes him to all these horror sites. Like, he took him to My Bloody Valentine, where they shot them, and he shows him horror movies, and his son has an appreciation for them. So he asks all the time, like, how did they do that, Daddy? How did they do this? So he will show them bonus features behind the scenes. So they watched a few Paranormal Activity movies, and he started asking how they did certain things, like how they do the footprints. How did Katie get dragged out of bed? And Nate was like, I actually don't know. And like started looking up, and he's like, no one's ever done behind the scenes. No one's ever done bonus features. Like, it's always supposed to be like, this is real. So no one's going to put that stuff out there. Whereas if like you look at Saw or The Conjuring or things like that, there's so much behind the scenes. There's so much stuff there. So he called Anthony and told Anthony, like, hey, I know you might have hung up the documentary stuff and I'm moving more towards narrative, but you should consider this, because I think there'd be a market for it. So Anthony was like, well, let me call Rachel, because Rachel knows Oren, Rachel knows Katie, Rachel knows Mika. She's like, let me talk to her. And they got involved. And then they started interviewing directors. And I think what Anthony said is every person that he was interviewing was kind of like, they're too big for this. They don't care enough. It's not that they don't care, but it's like, oh, this found footage movie, whatever. And I was working on Hell House 3 at the time. And Anthony and I were friends. We got connected from a mutual friend, and I just moved out to California. And Anthony said, hey, if you're working and need extra help, you should give my buddy Nate a call. He'd love to come out and work on the set or whatever. So I was like, yeah, of course. So I called Nate, asked him to come out. He helped on set. He was great in kind of like that final sequence when everyone's running out of the house. And, you know, it was like half working with him, half showing him all the cool shit that we did on Hell House. And when he was done, he's like, you like Paranormal Activity, don't you? And I was like, I love Paranormal Activity. He goes, would you ever consider directing the documentary that we're trying to make? And I was like, yes, like, of course. And so he was like, let me talk to Anthony about it. And then like literally a day later, Anthony emailed me and he was like, first off, thank you for bringing Nate on set. But second, I'm so sorry. I've been talking to you about this documentary for the last 6 months. Like, I had no idea that you would be interested in doing a documentary. Would you want to talk with Rachel and I? And I was like, yes, absolutely. And I think by the time I met with them, when I got back to the West Coast, as we shot in Pennsylvania for the movie, I had a 30-page outline with a complete vision of how I wanted to tell the story, who I wanted for the interviews, and kind of like the entire nuts and bolts of everything that I wanted to do. And I think they were just like blown away that someone cared this much.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's funny because this leads into the next question I had, and this is probably going to be a dumb question. I may be answering it myself, but because you're credited obviously as not only the director but the writer. And when you say writing a documentary, since a documentary obviously is mostly interviews, does that writing component include just like crafting, I guess, the whole narrative of it, like how it's going, like what? Yeah, like other words, like what does writing a documentary mean?
Sure. So it wasn't like you had like a 120-page script or something like that. It was more like, so for starters, I built on that outline. So the final outline was like 45 pages, but ultimately it was certain things like, I want this movie to feel like that. Writing this out, like I want this movie to feel like people are watching a found footage movie. So it should open the same way these do. We should open in the streets. We should ask people what scares them. We should go through this whole entire link of random things that scare them, but then make sure that we're getting all the things that turn towards supernatural, unknown things that are in your house, and then lead to Oren explaining what scares him. And that'll open up the door. I like wrote a whole thing on found footage, about the history of it, about what's the real first found footage movie, which was Cannibal Holocaust, that had it in there, but what's the first one that had a full movie being it, which was UFO abduction, and just kind of like all those different things. And I never knew we were going to be able to get all of these people involved. So I kind of crafted where you're going, how everything is looking, how we open each scene, how the nights are like the films and all that kind of stuff, and crafted the beginning, middle, and end. And that was about a 45-page outline. And then I wrote every single question that I asked every single person. So, yeah. And like I had feedback from the producers and asked them if we were good collaboration. I was like, this is what I want to ask. Any thoughts, any whatever. And then of course, like I sat with Oren for 4.5 hours. Like, you can't use 4.5 hours in the documentary. The movie's 95 minutes long.
Did he ask you to move into his house for the documentary? That's just a joke for listeners, because we learned in the documentary that in the first movie, he literally had Katie and Mika, the two lead actors, move into his house where he filmed the first movie.
It only took 7 days, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I was lucky enough to meet you at the premiere. I don't want to brag.
Well, the premiere of what?
No, I'm sorry. Paranormal Activity, Next of Kin.
You're like the premiere of Halloween Kills.
Halloween Kills. No, but you told me that it took 2 years from start to finish.
Yeah. So it was like a little. So they kind of came up with everything around January or February of 2019. They brought me in May of 2019, and then we sat down with Katie, Mika, and Oren, because that was the thing. Like, we didn't have like a marketing or distribution plan. We reached out to Paramount, asked if they were interested, and they didn't really get a lot of, much back from them at that point. So we were like, Rachel, call Oren and see what he can do. And Oren he lives in New Zealand, and he was visiting, and he was doing like a 6-week trip with his family back to California in the United States. So he was in San Diego. And we were like, can we come down to the house and like talk to you about it? And he's like, we can't go in. I sold the house. The guy doesn't really like to like do that kind of stuff. And we're like, okay. So we went down, we shot all the stuff outside his house. I sort of did like a 5-minute interview outside the house with him. We did some B-roll of the house. And then we went back to LA, and he said he was going to be in LA in like a few weeks. So Anthony started calling all the owners of the houses. He got in touch with the owner of the second house, from Paranormal Activity 2. They were like, yeah, come do this. Like, that's great. You can have the house for the day. So we went. It was Anthony, Rachel, me, Nate, and then we brought on Tom Sullivan, the camera operator, cinematographer, live director, to come work with us and help out. And we got Oren to come, and we got Katie and Mika to come, and we did all of their interviews. And like I said, it was like an 8 or 9 hour day of interviews. And we got so, like, honestly, we could have told a story just with the three of them.
I think it was fascinating. My favorite was the beginning.
I have to ask like revealing question. Number one, when someone like the owner of the Paranormal Activity 2 house says you can come here, do they ask you to pay them? Be honest.
So some people did.
Well,
some
no,
people did. Some people did. I don't remember if we paid her. We might have paid her a little bit, but like she has a daughter who was like 16, who's trying to be an actor. She has a son who was like 14 or 15. So they're both around the same age. And like they were fascinated by it. So we were kind of walking through them, like explaining how things. So we interviewed them as well. And we were if we ever got to do a bonus features thing, we were going to do a like interview with all the people who own the houses and how it changed their lives. Like every Halloween, people come up to their house and shoot stuff. And so we were going to do that too. We wound up not doing it because what happened was we did that. Then in August, we booked a studio for a week. And Nate just started reaching out to everyone. And Nate's one of those people, he's super fearless. He's like, we're like, oh man, how are we going to get in touch with Jason Blum? He's like, I'm just going to email his agent. I'm going to email his manager. I'm going to email everyone so someone responds to me. And so the first group of people that were like, we didn't even have to chase, were the entire cast for the marked ones. Like Christopher Landon's entire cast and Christopher Landon were like the first people to be like, fuck yeah, I'll do this.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
We got them. Then we got like Steven Schneider. We got a couple horror critics. We got the Vicious Brothers to talk to found footage. We got a bunch of different people, and we rounded out a good group of like, I'd say about 80%, 70% of who we wanted. And then it was like every time we got someone, we would get more people. And it'd be like, oh, Oren and Katie and Mika did this. And then we got Chris Landon. And we're like, Chris Landon did this. And then we got other people. But the issue that we had was when you make anything, probably doesn't happen on a podcast, but in films, when you make anything, films take a really long time to make. So you go through really good moments and really shitty moments. And I think what we were finding from a lot of these people where they were like, who the hell are you guys? And what are you trying to do? So they were a little like guarded because, you know, this movie, like they spit these movies out for 6 or 7 straight years. And there were a lot of tough times. There were a lot of difficult things that went on during set. Like some people did not have as great of experience as other people. So a lot of them were like, they thought we were going to like mudsling, and they thought we were doing like a piece that was going to like tear them apart and make them look bad. So there's a lot of like coaxing them, talking to different people, having conversations with them. And then once the interview started going, it was like people like, oh, you're just really trying to highlight this franchise and what it did for horror and what it did for
everyone came across like $1 million. Like everyone
like how much they love it. Yeah. I mean, I don't think for the podcast interviews, other than sometimes we ask, you know, slightly more provocative questions, but we never we try to focus on all of the positive, and so many people we've spoken to, like some of these movies for 30, 40 years have been like have really set their career in motion. So they love talking about it, or they're used to talking about it, you know, but the best is when we interview someone who maybe hasn't talked about it in a while, and like we have to remind them of things, and then we feel extra cool.
Yeah. I mean, because these movies are like 30, 40 years old, but, and, you know, if people want to get gossipy, I'm all ears.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of again, one more gossipy question. Is Oren Peli set for life? I mean, like, no, because
I think if you look him up online, I think his net worth is like $50 million. Like,
my God, when you said he moved to New Zealand, that was my first quote, because it's like, the story of how Paranormal Activity, the first one, was made is like literally I feel like filmmaker's dream, you know, that you can make 100%. Because the budget, I think, was 15,000. Gross is 193 worldwide, spawns, you know, now 6 sequels and, you know, so much fandom. And, you know, he has 2 actors come in. I think what I loved about the documentary is when Katie and Mika were saying like their audition was just like improv in like a North Hollywood.
Well, first up, that alone, auditioning in North Hollywood, that'd be my first scare.
What's wrong with North Hollywood?
I'm
not moving into his house to shoot, but North Hollywood.
Listen, I'm from West Hollywood. Okay. I'm snotty like that.
I live in the Valley, so I have no problem with North Hollywood. But one of the things. Want to ask like if they're.
Yeah. So I think I asked you, like, the first thing I asked you was when I met you was like, did you get Steven Spielberg? Because he changed the ending, because the original, she just gets shot and then.
Yeah. So like, I guess there's kind of 2 questions in that. Number one, what did you think of the original ending personally versus what they changed it to? And then 2, did you ever even try to reach out to Steven Spielberg and say like,
oh, totally. So we did try to reach out to Steven Spielberg. We were actually talking with his people for a very long time. Because what happened was August is when we did that long week and got most of the people. Then over the course of September and October was when we got a lot of the big players. Like we got Jason Blum, and Jason Blum is so fucking cool. He was so awesome. Like when we were talking with his team, they were like, we have to do hair and makeup for him. We have to do all this stuff. And we're like, okay, we'll pay for all those things. And then we showed up and he was like, fuck hair and makeup. He's like, just do it now. He's like, I don't. And his like assistant's like, but you need this. He's like, no,
like, we already paid for it.
And he was super cool. He wanted to tell us everything. He was so blunt and so forthcoming. And
I could tell.
Oh, we met him at a convention. I mean, we've never gotten to interview him. That would be a dream. But like, we just saw him. It was the Halloween 40th year convention. And I just like walked up and I just said like, oh, I can't wait for the new Halloween movie. He's like, yeah, it's gonna be fucking cool. Like that's
he seems like that guy that's like super down to make movies, super fun. And like, if you like him and you work with him, he will continue to work with you and he will continue to like do things for you. And so like my favorite thing about him was we had a couple people that we were having trouble getting in touch with, like Adam Goodman. We couldn't figure out how to get in touch with him because he doesn't run Paramount anymore. He's doing his own thing. A couple of the other actors who we were kind of dying on, like they would respond and we wouldn't hear from them for weeks. He was just like, who haven't you got? And we were like, well, we haven't gotten Adam Goodman. We haven't gotten X, Y, and Z. And he'd be like, give me a second. And then he's like, give me your number. I'll text you this. And then he just exchanged numbers with Anthony and I. And like the next day, like Adam Goodman's people and like 3 other people were like, hey, they reached out to us and like, hey, we'll do this interview. And it was like,
he was the former president, right, of Paramount?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
That was fascinating.
So what you're saying is that it's good to know people in high places.
Correct. Correct. But so he opened the door and then, and like things just kind of started falling in place. But we tried to get in touch with Steven Spielberg. We were talking to these people. He was shooting West Side Story. But what happened was we shot everything and we didn't get the little girls from Paranormal Activity 3. There were a few people that we didn't get. We didn't get Grandma Lois, like a few people that we were trying to get and it wasn't really working out. But I was always like, I think we have what we need. It'd be great to get them, but we have what we need to tell the story. And then we stopped. And then at that point, and we got Ashley Brooks because Ashley Brooks still works for Paramount. She's the other Paramount executive.
I loved her, by the way.
She's awesome. She was so great. And she started talking with us about stuff. But then that was when around the time, like when they had already said like a new Paranormal Activity film was going to come out, like midway through us doing these interviews. So no one would say like what it would be or what the idea is. They said, we're not 100% sure, but it will be coming out soon. So Ashley was talking with us about a bunch of stuff. And then the pandemic hit. And so we kind of got into this position where it was like Paramount now wants to work with us and wants to buy our documentary because they want to release it to sort of promote Next of Kin. But we just hit a pandemic. So the whole year during the pandemic, it was like, we kind of started editing, but we were like, are we waiting? Like, we're not sure how involved Paramount's going to be. Like, are they going to tell us you have to do it this way? Are they going to let us tell our story? And then we made the deal with Paramount and then we like went high into post-production. And while we were in post-production, we were still reaching out to Steven's team. And then eventually Catherine Newton was one of the people that we didn't get. So we finally did get Catherine Newton and we sat down with her and this was during COVID. So we had masks and all that other kind of stuff. And I think that probably like the unsafe being around people was probably why we didn't get Steven Spielberg. Right. But then once we got Catherine and once we started moving on, we were able to kind of put the interviews together and still tell the story in a fun way. So we showed Paramount, they were happy with it. The good thing, and by the way, I know I'm talking forever, but the thing that I do want to make sure for anyone who is listening to this, I've read reviews. Most of the reviews on this documentary are really good, but I've heard some people be like, well, this is clearly a puff piece for Seven. Like it is not a puff piece for Seven.
So not.
We never ever envisioned. My plan was never to even talk about Seven. My whole plan was to end the movie with where found footage can go and end with Jason Blum saying, I don't think we're ever going to see a movie like this. It was just brilliant, and end with that and kind of like end to like the next opportunity to make the next great found footage movie is up to you as like a filmmaker. And that was the plan. But then when Paramount came on, they said they wanted stuff from Seven. So we were like, can we go and be on set? Like, can we go to Buffalo and can we be on set so I can interview them? And first it was yes, then no, because of COVID. Then it was like, can you give us some questions? And then it was like, your questions have to be extremely vague. We're not going to give anything about the movie there. So we put everything together. We sent them questions. I gave them a guide of how to shoot it, what to do. Some of the things were done, some of the things weren't done. And then we got like maybe 10 minutes of footage to kind of cut together and put at the end of the movie. But it was never, and that was their only request, is like put a piece together that just kind of guided towards 7. But my personal thoughts were, they released the movie the same day they released Next of Kin. And to me, it was like, why did we put 7 in there if it's coming out at the exact same time? Like, we should have come out like a couple weeks before so we can get everyone to be like, I want to go watch this on Paramount Plus. But at the end of the day, it was great. I'm grateful. But
no, I actually watching it didn't get the feeling it was a puff piece at all. I got the feeling that part about 7 was tacked on. You know what I mean? Like, I got the feeling that you were making a documentary about the series as it was. And I'm not just saying that because we just repeated that, because it does feel like it was like, okay, but now we need something related to the new movie, but we couldn't. Did you ever feel pressure to, because of the release, maybe hold off some so that you could cover the new movie? Or were you like, no, we're too far in it, I don't want to hold off, let's just go?
I think Anthony and Rachel probably wanted to hold off some for that, but I never really did, because I still think the story on itself, the rags to riches story, and becoming like almost $1 billion franchise in box office, like, to me, that's incredible. And to me, I never made it like I knew fans were going to love this because it was things that had never been spoken about before. My goal was to make it so that people who never seen the movies would stumble upon it and be like, now I actually want to go watch those movies. So I was trying to like appeal to like a broader audience. But yeah, I think it was just one of those things where it kind of, everything kind of came together. Everything worked out. We got a lot of things that I never thought we were going to get. And it kind of just became this, a good story for 5 people putting this thing together.
It really is. And I just want to reiterate and that not only fans of Paranormal Activity, but just fans of horror, that maybe you haven't seen all of the Paranormal Activities, maybe you just saw the first one. This documentary, it's so interesting. Like, I remember afterwards, because documentaries are different than films. You have to really be invested. But in this one, it was just so interesting. I remember we were talking about it afterwards, that like we were fascinated and entertained the whole time. So really, we just want to compliment you. And we're not just saying that because you're our guest. We really were, because I'm not as big.
I've seen all of the Paranormal Activities opening night, and like I felt like I totally got a good education on. I mean, like especially the in between part, like saying how much it made, and I loved all.
I was gonna say I'm not as big a fan of the behind. Like, I'm not the type of horror fan that jumps right to the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah,
I don't know why. Even for like my favorite franchise of all time, the Halloween franchise, I haven't even watched a lot of the behind the scenes stuff for some reason. But this really kept us like interested. And it was just crafted really well. So seriously,
thank you.
Congratulations.
And I really appreciate that, guys, because listen, coming from a narrative background, my whole thing was I did not want this to be just like a bonus features thing.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted it to have some form of narrative, some form of like creative drive to it. So that was always what I was trying to do. And I appreciate you guys saying that, because that was like my biggest goal, is to make sure that it has some form of creativity.
Yeah. And I think just for some additional questions, I think we can kind of jump around and stuff, because rather than asking you to reiterate stuff, which people can see,
I could actually tell you something that I'm sure you asked me earlier, if I could say things that I've never said before.
Please.
So we had, my favorite interview by far was with Henry Juice and Ariel Schulman. Henry and Rel were the coolest fucking guys.
Directors of 3 and 4.
Oh, yeah. So my big question I was going to ask you before you go on is catfish real?
No. I mean, yes. I'm sorry. Yes, it is.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
No. Sorry. No, I asked them that behind the scenes. I asked all that stuff. Like, literally, it is real. Like, they shot that movie.
Are you just giving us the answer they want you to give us?
No, I promise you. Like, I have no ties to anyone. Like, these guys are the most genuine people I've ever met in my life. Like, they literally almost lost making a studio film because they stuck to their guns. Like, these guys are the most genuine, the most fun. I had like an hour with them, so I didn't get to go down a path. Like, there were a couple things, and this is kind of what I was going to say. There were a couple things I didn't get to ask people, but then there were a lot of things that I did get to ask people. Like, one of the things was the dad in 4 passed away right before, like 2 or 3 weeks before the movie came out. I wanted to talk about that, but I only was able to talk to like 2 or 3 people about it. So it was kind of one of those things where it's like, do we talk about this or do we not talk about this? And I felt like if we did talk about it, some of the key people that we had, I wasn't able to ask that in that question. And I didn't want it to come across like they didn't care about this guy.
Right. Like, we're not commenting on that. Yeah,
exactly. So I didn't do that, but there are a lot of like, I asked a lot of really difficult questions. Like, I asked Chris Landon, like, why did they choose a white guy from Beverly Hills to direct a movie about a bunch of Hispanic people? Like, I was asking really and he answered it very truthfully. And like, we had it in the original cut and then we wound up cutting it out. But
What was his answer? What was his answer?
Because he didn't understand. He didn't understand. Like, he didn't get why he was doing that. But Adam and Ashley trusted him so much because he was kind of the one guiding the narrative.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, for that, I get it because he had been writing and working on so many of the films. So it was almost like when you see these series and it's like, okay, it's your turn to direct, almost like.
Yeah. And side note, Chris Landon's really good looking.
Yeah. Side note, Tim wants to date.
Good looking dude.
Married with children.
Yeah. He's a good looking dude.
I'm just gonna say, side note, Tim's hoping Chris Landon's listening and gonna leave his husband.
He loves Happy Horror Time podcast.
He really does. He is our biggest listener. Sorry, go on. So okay, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that kind of question.
5 of the marked ones and Next of Kin are the only 2 movies out, including one. They're the only 2 movies that were shot with like a beginning, a middle, and end, and a plan. All the other films were shot. And the thing that blows me away to this day is like 6 months to make a movie. Like, most found footage movies are shot in like 7 days, 8 days, 10 days, 14 days. Oren's film was shot in 7, and then it wound up being like maybe 4 or 5 extra days for all the reshoots of what they did. But all of these movies were shot in 6 months. Like, to compare that to other movies, that's how long it takes for them to shoot a Lord of the Rings movie. Like, I can't imagine the amount of stress that the people are under on a daily basis. And, you know, like, even me, like, I hope they hire me to make Paranormal Activity 8 or Paranormal Activity 9, but I can't imagine as a filmmaker, which is why I saw like some frustration from Henry and Rel, especially.
You could tell the guy from the director in part 2. Is that right?
Yeah. He was all Kip, Todd Williams. He was all, like, you could see it, like, when you talk to these people.
He was still recovering.
We were talking about that. We were like, this is the only guy who doesn't seem very happy.
Not as enthusiastic.
Yeah, I believe he got in a motorcycle accident. We talked about this, but again, it didn't work in the narrative. He got in a motorcycle accident, and they were in a post production. They were in an editing session, and he didn't show up, and no one knew where he was. And he showed up like 2 hours later, like in a cast. And like, yeah, like, oh my God. Like, there's so many fun stories.
It was paranormal related.
Well, I have a question. Since we're just all over the map now. Okay, so Katie mentioned at the beginning, she said that after people saw Paranormal Activity, they'd go over and see her at Pucco de Beppo.
Because she worked there.
She worked there. Okay, but then she said it's a whole thing, but she didn't go into like, what's the whole thing? Like, Pucco de Beppo wouldn't let her out, or what's going on?
No. The whole thing because she couldn't leave working there.
Is that
correct? So when the movie came out, I mean, realistically, again, the reason why I told the story the way I told it is because when you look at any other film franchise, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, there's always someone that blew up, like Johnny Depp or Kevin Bacon. In the found footage world and in Paranormal Activity, the people who became the most successful and the most known were the filmmakers. Like, Oren became known, Blumhouse became a thing. Henry and Rel went on to do studio films. Chris Landon actually is now a very, sought after director. That's who the franchise like kind of highlighted. And it was just, to me, I think when you're talking about the filmmaking side of things and how it blew up those careers, it's easy to forget that like the actors had a lot of things happen to them. And I know this happened it didn't happen with the Paranormal Activity cast, but it definitely happened with the Blair Witch cast, which is they were hidden, they were taken away. And like to this day, like they never made close to the amount of money that the filmmakers made for the Blair Witch Project or the second or third movie. And I know, Katie, Oren, and Nika are such a tight knit group. And I think what Katie was speaking to is like, they got paid like $500 to make that movie. And really like when all those things happened, like they were very involved. They did the reshoots. They were constantly with Oren back and forth, but they were working, they were doing other things. And I think when the movie came out, like for them, it was kind of a whirlwind and like no one expected it to become what it was.
Like winning the lottery, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think what Katie was speaking to was like, she like wasn't, she wasn't getting other gigs. A lot of other things. So she was working her regular day job. And like when the movie came out and people started being like, you're the person, that's when she was like, maybe I should quit this job. Like maybe things are going to change. And that's kind of when like it changed.
And Pucco de Beppo's like, no, now people are coming.
Yeah, I was like, I was thinking there was some kind of
lost our best server.
Wait, I do have to ask about Katie specifically because you know how every horror franchise kind of has the face of the franchise. Like Halloween, it's Jamie Lee Curtis. It's like a consistent character, or whether it's the villain, in the series. I feel like if there is one consistent face throughout the series, it's Katie. And I was going to ask you, did you get the sense that she embraced that, like that she loves being kind of the face of Paranormal Activity, or did you get the sense that maybe she felt like it kind of typecast her or kept her from other roles?
Listen, I think in general, any person that's in a position like that will probably feel a little the typecast thing. But like, Katie's one of the sweetest people that I've ever met in my entire life. Like, this is my shameless plug. After doing the whole thing, like, Katie and I are actually really close friends now. And Katie is such a good person. And she's one of those people that recognizes like, this was an amazing opportunity. And like, there are millions of people that never had this chance. So I think, you know, she was young when she did it, like very young. She was like 23 or 24 or something. This film has spanned 7 movies, a decade. So this is a big part of her life. And I think she's very grateful for that and very understanding that like this movie really gave her the chance to live out her dreams and do her dreams.
So what we usually end interviews with, we always ask everyone, like, if you can tell us one thing about working on whatever movie they were in that you've never told anybody else, like any other interview or podcast or whatever, but you've already, I feel like, told us a lot of those things. So I would rather ask you, and whatever you wanted to say now, if there's any other projects you're working on right now or currently in the works or anything.
Sure. So I'm in the process of writing a supernatural film right now that I'm hoping that I could direct in the next year or so. I have someone who's going to fund it, but got to get some of the details out. We just wrapped production in September on Stephen Cognetti, the guy who I work with on Hell House. He just directed his first narrative feature. It's called 825 Forest Road. So we just finished production on that at the beginning of October. And we're hoping, I believe that movie is probably going to come out next October around Halloween time.
So a horror movie, I assume.
Horror movie. Yeah. It's the main character. It stars the woman who's the main character in the third Hell House movie, Elizabeth Amelia, the one who's interviewing everyone.
Yes. Is it supernatural? Is it what?
Yeah. Steve's world is supernatural. I think everything Steve will ever direct will be a supernatural movie. But it's a supernatural movie. It's a kind of a ghost story about a brother and sister who move back to their mom's hometown that's kind of getting haunted by this ghost. Or this woman, Helen Foster. So
and
I don't want to tell you much more.
Is the clown making an appearance?
No. Everyone on set was like, "Can we tie this to the Hell House lore in some way?"
Like, okay, so the clown
wouldn't make sense. And then the other thing is, like, we keep telling people, like, we got to get the Abaddon tapes going, like the stories. And Steve is more of a supernatural guy. I'm more of a slasher guy. The way we've crafted these stories with the Abaddon tapes is there's elements of supernatural and there's elements of slasher. And the way we co-created it together is all the supernatural stuff Steve is going to write and direct, all the slasher stuff I'm going to write and direct. So I hope we get the opportunity to tell that, because I think fans, similar to the Paranormal Activity doc, I think fans will be like, this is so cool to understand why Andrew Tully created this cult, or why this house got put, how Alex got pulled into this in the first place. I think people would really want to see those answers.
Speaking for fans of the series, we would love to see those. And it's funny because Tim and I are very, very slasher oriented people. I mean, obviously we love supernatural, but our favorite series are slasher.
If you grew up in the 80s and early 90s.
Yes, exactly. Sure. And so we love the slasher series. So working slasher, I love supernatural, obviously, but to me, it's always scared me more of just someone with a mask coming after me, because there's nothing I can do about it.
You could run.
What I mean is that you can't say
you run up the stairs, trip.
Well, you can't say I don't believe in people with masks with knives, because just watch the news. But so we would love to see that. That's great. Wow, it sounds like you have a lot going on, and that's really, really cool and like really exciting.
Thank you.
It is. I just want to say it has been so nice speaking with you.
Awesome.
Like, you can just hear the amount of passion you have for this genre, and being people who are very passionate about it. Also, it feels like family. You feel like our next of kin.
Look at that segue into your next show.
Yeah, no, but really, like, seriously,
guys, this is so cool. I want to be friends with you guys. I love doing this. This is like, I'm going to keep listening to your podcast and hearing what you guys come up with. I want to follow your guys' careers. Like, this has been so great. And like, I think, like, you guys being big fans of Hell House, like, Steve, myself, any other people I work with, we appreciate people like you, and we appreciate people that actually talk about this kind of stuff, because we love making movies. We love doing things for the fans. We're always talking about what would make people happy. How would this work? What are our fans going to think? And we wouldn't have careers if it wasn't for people who watch the movies and people like you guys who talked about it. So I want to say thank you to you guys for just being awesome and having fun with it.
Thanks. That is really awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's what we do. I mean, we really started this podcast because we love watching horror movies, and we were talking about them anyway. So we're like, why don't we record them? And then it was kind of like, hey, all these people we grew up loving, what if we got to talk to them about the movies? And it just kind of started. And so we've been doing it, and it's been great. But yeah, like again, like I said, you can tell when someone really, truly loves this genre, and you can tell how much passion you have. So I wish you nothing but the best in your career.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We definitely have to keep in touch because I mean,
absolutely,
we could talk for hours. I'm sorry we even had to cut. We just we could talk to you for hours. So this has been really great.
Well, the fans don't have this, but you guys have my email address and you have my phone number. So give me a ring.
You're like, and for fans, that phone number is.
Fans, it is.
Call him if you have any paranormal activity questions.
If you have any question about paranoia, his line is always open. Can you imagine?
Between the hours of 1 and 3, preferably.
Only between 1 and 6 a.m. No, okay.
Oh, guys, I'll tell you this after we cut. So, but good. Good talking
well,
to you.
yes. Well, thank you so much. Yes. I'm gonna and so yeah, it's been great talking to you. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Take care. We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Right,
okay.
bye.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Happy Horror Time.
This podcast is hosted by Matt Emmer and myself, Tim Murdoch. It's co-produced and edited by Jacob Randall.
We release episodes every Sunday, switching off between reviewing recently released horror films and interviewing horror stars and insiders. And we have a ton of fun along the way.
You can stream all our episodes directly from our website, happyhorrortime.com, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And make sure to follow all our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Happy Horror Time.
If you'd like to support this podcast, please sign up to be a patron at patreon.com/happyhorrortime. Patrons get access to our growing library of bonus episodes where we discuss older horror films, look back at popular franchises, and all kinds of fun horror stuff.
And if you'd like to contact us, send us an email at happyhorrortime@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners.
I'm Matt Emmert.
And I'm Tim Murdoch.
And we hope you have a happy horror time.